Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. The topic of this webinar is Energy Storage in Massachusetts, What the Study Said, and What's Next. This webinar is a presentation of the Energy Storage Technology Advancement Partnership, also known as STAP. STAP is supported by the U.S. Department of Energy and Sandia National Laboratories, and it is managed by the Clean Energy States Alliance. And our host for this webinar is STAP Project Director Todd Olinsky-Paul, and we have a number of excellent guest speakers with us today. Before I pass it over to them, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping notes. So all of our participants for this webinar are in listen-only mode. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of this webinar. You can either call in using your telephone or you can connect using your computer, mic, and speakers. A very important note, we ask that you please submit your questions as you think of them throughout the webinar by typing them into the question box on your webinar console and hitting send. We will be reading through your questions as they come in, and we will get to as many as we can during our Q&A with the audience at the end of our presentations. We do have a lot of people registered for this webinar, so we expect to get a lot of questions. If you want to make sure that we get to yours, type it in as you think of it. Don't wait until the end. And a final note, this webinar is being recorded. You will find a recording of this webinar as well as all of our previous STAP webinars archived on the CISA website at cisa.org/webinars. And we will also send you a follow-up email within about 24 hours with a link to the recording of this webinar and the slides. With that, I would like to pass it over to our host for this webinar, Todd Olinsky-Paul.
Thanks, Samantha, and welcome everybody to the webinar. This is going to be a little longer than usual webinar that we do. Usually we do an hour. This will be an hour and a half because we have a number of excellent presenters and a lot to discuss, and we anticipate a lot of questions. So, as always, we ask you to type your questions in as you think of them and not wait until the end, and that will help us to kind of organize those and get to as many of them as we can. So I'd like to start by doing a little brief introduction of our program, and then we will move on and I'll introduce the presenters and we'll get to the meat of the presentation. So this is a presentation of our Energy Storage Technology Advancement Partnership, STAP program, which is conducted under contract with Sandia National Laboratories and funded by U.S. Department of Energy, Office of Electricity. If you could advance the slide, please, Samantha. So I want to thank Dr. Emery Juk from US DOE and Dan Borneo from Sandia. Next slide, please. And the STAP program is really dedicated to supporting energy storage work and especially work where states are teaming with DOE and the National Lab to support deployment of energy storage. And so we have projects all over the map. Many of these are specific deployments. Some of them are, as in this case, an effort to support a state in developing policy and rolling out programs. Next slide, please. I just have this slide because I like to point out that if you aren't on our mailing list and you'd like to get notified about future events such as this webinar or future opportunities to get materials that we might be producing or notices for other upcoming events, you should sign up for a mailing list. There's a green button there with a red circle around it that says sign up for the email list. You can do that at our website, and then on the left there's a red arrow that points to the link to our STAP webinars. This webinar is going to be posted there in its entirety along with all the other ones that we have archived, and slides will also be available. So that's where you would go to watch, review this webinar if you would like to see parts of it again or others that we've done in the past. Next slide, please. And before I introduce the panelists, I also want to acknowledge the generous support of the Bar Foundation for our sister organization Clean Energy Group, which is also working with Massachusetts and other states in the Northeast to roll out energy storage programs and policy, and we'll be doing that going forward with some of the Massachusetts agencies. So today we have, as I said, a number of excellent panelists. Dr. Imre Zsuk of U.S. DOE Office of Electricity and Energy Reliability is unfortunately not able to be with us in person, but has sent a few slides that I'll review at the beginning of the presentations in his stead. We have Kavita Ravi from Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, where she is the Director of Strategic Analysis and MassDEC's lead for the energy storage study, and is currently busy drafting the energy storage solicitation that will follow from the report. We also have Jackie DeRosa from CES. She's the Vice President of Emerging Technologies for Customized Energy Solutions, part of the team that wrote the report. We have Dr. Randall Johnson, Chief Analytics Officer at Alivo Analytics, which conducted modeling for the report. And we have Will Lauwers, who is Director of the Emerging Technology Division at the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources, which together with MassDEC commissioned the report and is directing much of the policy and program development that will follow from it. So next slide, please. We're very happy to have all of you with us today. Samantha, if you could just advance, thank you. I should mention, and I'm not, that seems maybe out of order, but I'll mention it anyway. This is the State of Charge Energy Storage Initiative study, and there's a link there. If you haven't got the study, you really should take a look at it. Samantha, do we have Emery's slides? Because I wanted to go over them before I pass this on to the next presenter. Okay, there we go. All right, thank you. So I'm just going to present this in Emery's absence, as he couldn't be with us today. He wanted to say a few words about DOE Office of Electricity projects supporting the Massachusetts Energy Storage Initiative. If you could just advance that, please. DOE applauds the State of Charge report commissioned by the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources and Clean Energy Center, which recommends policy and program initiatives designed to support deployment of 600 megawatts of energy storage by 2025. The DOE Office of Electricity's energy storage program is pleased to participate in this initiative through analysis, leveraged funding, and joint deployments. A few of the projects should be mentioned. If you could advance that, please. So these are some of the projects that are currently underway in Massachusetts. Obviously, the study recommends a suite of policy and program initiatives that will support a lot more storage. And as we know, currently deployed in Massachusetts, there's a total of maybe 1.5 megawatts of energy storage that's deployed and operational in the state. We're looking at a goal from this study of 600 megawatts. So there's a lot of headroom for additional work, and these are some of the projects that are underway right now that DOE is involved with. So first off, there's the Sterling, Massachusetts microgrid. We just did a groundbreaking for this project about 2 weeks ago. This is in Sterling, Massachusetts. It received a grant from the DOER Community Clean Energy Resiliency Initiative, which is supporting resilient power projects, and some supplemental grant funding from US DOE. And that project is supposed to be up and running and online by the end of this year. Next slide, please. The Northampton, Massachusetts microgrid is another one that was funded under the DOER Resiliency Initiative and is also getting some support. These are all getting support from Sandia National Laboratories, and the Northampton project is additionally getting some support from Pacific Northwest National Labs. This will be a project that ties together 3 campuses with energy storage and creates an islandable microgrid that will support a hospital, a school, and a Department of Public Works facility. Next slide, please. So most of the work to date in energy storage deployment in the United States has been using either the old lead-acid battery technology or the more currently fashionable or more in use lithium-ion batteries. There are, you might be interested to find out, 2 grid-scale flow battery projects in Massachusetts. There's a 0.5 megawatt being developed in Worcester and another 0.5 megawatt being developed in Everett. The Worcester project is integrated with wind, and the Everett project is integrated with solar PV, and both of these are in development right now. Next slide, please. And those are supported with some ARRA money. I think the purpose of this slide is just to point out that in working with Sterling, Massachusetts on that project I mentioned earlier, we realized that there really isn't much in the way of guidance for municipalities in producing storage RFPs, and so working with Sterling and Sandia and DOE and others, this document, which is now a Sandia lab publication, was produced and has actually gotten a lot of interest and a lot of uptake, and it's out there. It's freely available on our website and Sandia's website, and it's procurement guidance for municipalities. So if you are listening and you want to pick that up, it could be very useful. Next slide, please. And I finally want to point out another technology, storage technology, that is not often seen, but it can be quite useful, which is a flywheel technology. This is a regenerative train braking project where you capture the energy expended in braking and then use that when the train has to start up again. And this particular project is with using helix power technology flywheels, and there's quite a bit of work going on to get this technology into train systems, subway systems in cities in Massachusetts and New York and elsewhere. Okay, next slide, please. So that concludes Emery's slides, and sorry he couldn't be with us. I hope I did them justice, and I will now pass the baton to Kavita Ravi from Mass Clean Energy Center to begin introducing the energy storage study, and then we'll go on from there. So, Kavita, you're up.
Thank you, Todd. It is my real pleasure to be on this webinar with my illustrious colleagues, and I'm really excited to be able to introduce this study that we've been working on for a while and are most excited to publish. I think it's, along with many other studies, it really breaks new ground, and I'm really excited and eager to share the responses on it. So just to start a little bit with the context, I'm Kavita Ravi. I'm the Director of Strategic Analysis here at Mass CEC, and I'm responsible for studies and research and analysis delivered through reports for our organization. And back in 2014, we reached out to our sister agency, the Department of Energy Resources, to explore the opportunity to conduct a study for the potential for energy storage in the Commonwealth on a really sort of broad basis. We wanted to consider everything from deployment to industry growth. and really capture the benefits and address barriers and realize the opportunities that the energy storage presents here to the Commonwealth. So starting then, we developed an outline of the study, and then with Commissioner Jetson coming on board in April, we published the RFP for the study in May, and we received an overwhelming response for the consultants. And I'll take that in a little bit as credit to the scope of the study. We really tried to make it broad but also very relevant to Massachusetts. And this was the first active measure of the Baker-Polito administration's energy storage initiative, which had originally promised $10 million in investments for energy storage in incorporating advanced storage technologies into the Massachusetts energy storage portfolio. Right. And we were interested in exploring the benefits using a multi-pronged approach. We wanted to look at market structures. We were interested in building strategic partnerships, for example, with other renewable energy technologies that could benefit from storage technology. We were interested in storage projects in Massachusetts as as part of the early sort of deployment measure. We were interested in its positive impacts in the grid modernization effort in the utility distribution system. And most importantly, we wanted to see how costs of energy can be brought down by the use of energy storage for customers. So the RFP got an overwhelming response, and I think the applicants were as excited as we were in exploring the boundaries of the study and really getting into it. We were very pleased to pick this team led by Customized Energy Solutions and had all of their partners in place, and I'll let Jackie introduce them to conduct this study, and we really got into the thick of it in the middle of 2015. And because it was quite a groundbreaking study in terms of the framework and how it approached the Massachusetts-specific energy landscape, it did take us a while to work the framework and the analysis, and then consequently the cost benefits, and identify very specifically the barriers and deal with recommendations. And so we were then very pleased to publish it in September of 2016. And as many of you might know, stakeholder engagement was a very critical part of it. We held a kickoff meeting in October of 2015 and had several webinars and a more targeted engagement in the course of it. So we feel very pleased that the study is really grounded in stakeholder feedback and market engagement, and therefore we're optimistic about taking it forward with a variety of initiatives, including the advancing Commonwealth energy storage RFP, which is intended to be a set of demonstration projects for energy storage. So I'd like to close here saying that we're very interested in continuing to hear stakeholder feedback on the study itself. I hope you will enjoy the presentation by Jackie and Randall and Will Lauwers from DOER will give you some sense of some of the steps going forward. We at MassEC are immediately involved in designing this demonstration RFP that should come out very soon, and then we'll continue to work on other aspects such as safety and standards, and also supporting companies that have energy storage technologies. But we continue to encourage people to come back and talk to us and tell us what you think about the study or make suggestions and so on. With that, I'll conclude and hand it back to Todd. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Kavita. And so we are now going to move to Jackie and Randall, who will be doing a little tag team with their slides. No, we did not have slides Kavita did not have slides, but we will be showing some for the next two presenters, and then I think Will also doesn't have slides, but we can there's a couple slides of Jackie and Randall's that we will use. So if the slides don't change, don't worry. We're not, everybody doesn't have slides, but we do have plenty to show. So Jackie, if you're ready, please take over.
All righty. Well, thank you very much, Todd, and it really is a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. Thank you, Todd and Samantha and CISA, for inviting me, and to the Department of Energy, STAP, and Emery Juk, and to Dan Borneo at Sandia. Thank you for including me in today's webinar. Being part of the State of Charge study was an inspiring experience. It was a visionary process where we looked beyond how to look at things today and looked at new ways and better ways to evaluate energy storage integration. And I thank our study team, Alivo Analytics, for their cutting-edge ways of thinking and about new types of analysis, sustainable energy, and Daymark, our partners on the study team. And most importantly, thank you to the Department of Energy Resources and the Mass CEC for their leadership, their forward-thinking, and very team-oriented approach to developing this important state of charge study. Hopefully it's okay if I just give a quick background on who Customized Energy Solutions is. We were established in 1998. We're a privately owned corporation based in Philadelphia with offices throughout the country and internationally. We're a full services provider for consulting and market operations services so that we can take projects from their inception all the way through settlements and billing. CES is recognized now as a leader in the energy storage space, and our team's in-depth knowledge of market rules and the regulatory arena allow us to provide regulatory support as well as the most up-to-date market impact and pricing analyses. I did want to mention, too, that CES schedules over 5,000 megawatts of generation load and demand response from our Market Operations Center in Philadelphia. And of that, we also manage over 100 megawatts of advanced energy storage resources in multiple RTO markets, which are listed here. So our practical experience with day-to-day operation of energy storage facilities in competitive markets really provides our team with a base that sets our emerging technology consulting services apart. Anyway, enough of that. Now what we're here for, the State of Charge study. So thank you, Kavita, for your introduction regarding the study. It was great working with you and the team. And as she mentioned, as Kavita mentioned, the goals of the study, the State of Charge study, were to analyze the national and Massachusetts storage industry landscape, review the economic development and market opportunities for energy storage, and examine potential policies and programs to better support energy storage development in the Commonwealth. And also, just to reiterate, as Kavita highlighted, that the stakeholder engagement was an integral part of the study from the start and throughout the process. We really designed the focus of the study's qualitative and the quantitative analyses based on the guidance and input from stakeholders. We looked at the current state of the energy storage market in Massachusetts and then ultimately offered recommendations based on our experience here in Massachusetts and also in other markets to propagate the energy storage industry. So Randall and I will describe the system analysis, the use cases, the overall analysis that we used in the study, and ultimately the final recommendations, which include a suite of policies that are designed to promote the development of 600 megawatts of advanced energy storage in Massachusetts by 2025. And we estimate that 600 megawatts in the study, we estimate that this will provide $800 million in system benefits to Massachusetts ratepayers. It will increase grid resiliency and reduce greenhouse gas recommendations. And as Todd and Kavita mentioned, that we did include extensive recommendations in the report, really based on research and review of what the current programs are in Massachusetts and how they could be advanced or elaborated upon to better integrate energy storage. And we looked at ways to do demonstration funding, grant programs, inclusion of energy storage in the energy efficiency programs, amending the alternative portfolio standard to include all kinds of energy storage, not just the advanced flywheel, inclusion of solar plus storage in the next solar incentive program, and enabling the pairing of storage with renewables in future procurements. These will be expanded upon later, and clearly we have Will from the DOER on this webinar, so he and I can talk about this as we proceed throughout the review of the study. So next I'll dive into a review of the State of Charge report to give our audience an idea of what it entailed. I do have to say, though, the report is 225 pages, so clearly I can't go through every chapter on this webinar. So my goal is to really give the highlights of the report, what it includes, and how we conducted the analysis and came up with the results. So we started the report with an overview of energy storage technologies, their uses, and their costs. And next we looked at issues that were specific to Massachusetts, and then we conducted the detailed use cases and analysis and made the recommendations. So here on this slide I just show quickly from our study the descriptions of the different types of energy storage technologies, and really the report itself goes into a lot more detail. But the point that we wanted to make is that energy storage has evolved, and that we now have advanced energy storage beyond the current types of storage that have been available over the past decades. And these types of advanced energy storage resources and technologies are capable of dispatching electricity within seconds, and they can also provide various longer durations from whether 15 minutes to up to 10 hours. So the point that we wanted to make is that many energy storage technologies are in commercial operation throughout the world today. They're being used today by utilities and grid operators. And these technologies have been field tested, confirming that they can perform 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We also, let's see my slide, here we go. I have a slight delay on my slides moving, so hopefully I'm on track with what's being said. The other thing that the study points out are the attributes of energy storage resources, and here we highlight some of the differences that exist between conventional generating resources and these new technologies. And really, energy storage resources can be installed much more quickly than traditional resources, and that reduces risk and increases the technology's flexibility. So the study chapters, do describe in detail these attributes. Next, we talk about energy storage in Massachusetts, and also energy storage around the United States and globally. And here we see a map of where energy storage is currently installed today. And you'll see that there's 500 megawatts already installed and operating. If you look over to the northeast region of the U.S., there's already hundreds of megawatts of advanced energy storage operating commercially in the PJM Regional Transmission Organization. And then I guess the other point that we wanted to make in this chapter is that we're really at a turning point. There's even more, hundreds of megawatts under contract and coming online in the next few years. As the costs for energy storage are coming down, the capabilities of the technologies are advancing, and energy storage is now being predicted to grow exponentially. So if we looked at even just the 10 years from 2008 to 2018, we quantify in the report that the prices for storage technologies are significantly decreasing, with lithium-ion technology decreasing by almost 90%. So the point, again, is that energy storage is now cost competitive with other technologies. So Massachusetts really hasn't fully embraced the energy storage integration. Obviously, it's on its way, clearly, but currently Massachusetts ranks 23rd in installing energy storage. And you know, as Todd had alluded to, that a lot is happening already today. When our report was first written, some of these things hadn't begun, and that's something I do point out, that a lot of things have changed since we initially wrote some of these descriptions in terms of new legislation, new projects that are being built. But still, even with these newer resources being deployed, it's still far behind other states in the United States, which is really due to a lot of reasons that are addressed in the study. And I would say in general, there's just not the full understanding or appreciation yet of the benefits of energy storage and its commercial viability. And that's why these concepts are explained in detail in the Iou analysis and in the use cases. The report also does review what's happening in other states to put Massachusetts in context, and truly gives quite a bit of information about programs and integration of energy storage and wholesale markets behind the meter throughout the country. And I'm not going to go into that here, but the study does give quite a bit of information about where Massachusetts, how Massachusetts compares to what's happening throughout the country. So next we go into, the study goes into quite a bit of detail about what's happening in the Massachusetts power system and the power grid challenges being faced in Massachusetts today. And as we know, there's recently been announcements of power plant retirements in Massachusetts, including the 1,535 megawatt coal and oil-fired Brayton Point Station, and the 680 megawatt nuclear-fueled Pilgrim Power Station. So in addition to these retirements, other plants' generation is currently at risk due to age and economics. And the number that we've seen is estimated to up to 10,000 megawatts of retirements by 2020. So assuming power plants are retiring, there still needs to be enough generation and transmission to meet the peak load in the state, which is estimated to be a reserve margin of around 15%. And this chart right here shows the peak load really only occurs in limited hours of the year. So what our point here, and this is highlighted throughout the report and even in the executive summary, 17% of the costs spent on electricity in Massachusetts occur in the top 1% of hours. So that means in 87 hours of the year, that accounts for about, that's over $1 billion. So we can see there's changing dynamics on the power system in Massachusetts. Energy efficiency helps to lower consumption throughout the day, which is great. However, the system still has to be planned to meet that peak load that we just saw that we just discussed in the previous slide, under reliability planning requirements, which requires really until now more gas generation. And what we found is that building more gas peakers is not the most efficient use of the grid assets. When I talk about the grid assets, I mean both the generation and the transmission system. And that ultimately results in increased costs. So, in addition, we all know that there are natural gas constraints causing fuel supply concerns in Massachusetts, which result in higher cost winter reliability programs. And here on this slide, we see a winter peak day where the locational marginal price, the LMP, jumps to meet that peak load. So instead of utilizing gas peakers, we could use energy storage to use saved energy that was generated during the low-cost off-peak periods. And what does this do? This translates into lower generation, transmission, and distribution infrastructure costs. Massachusetts and the region are also integrating more and more renewable resources. Renewable integration requires that other resources be available to meet the intermittent dispatching needs. Energy storage is a flexible resource, and it can be dispatched in seconds or minutes to meet regulation and load following requirements on the grid. The distributed generation is another area leading to some of the examples that we show for the need of energy storage. The growth in distributed generation in Massachusetts is phenomenal. There are over 55,000 distributed solar projects already in Massachusetts, and distributed generation is growing at a rate of 500 installed projects per week. So as this distributed generation increases, utilities are challenged to manage reverse power flows at substations, and distributed energy storage really is a solution to alleviate this reliability concern. We also looked at the impact of high electric costs. We looked at outages and resiliency. And speaking to the electric costs, the commercial electricity customers in the Commonwealth pay utility demand charges based on peak hours, which can be extremely high when coupled with high usage. Energy storage, therefore, is a way to better manage the peak and reduce electricity costs. So what I'll do now is I'll pass this over to Randall, because the next step in our study was to conduct a system benefits analysis. And we tried to find out, from that analysis, we basically tried to obtain which, types of use cases would be cost effective and identify what additional incentives might be needed to make up the difference for that value that can't be currently obtained in today's market design. So I'll turn it over to Randall right now, and he can describe the system modeling that was done for the study.
All right, thank you, Jackie. That was a great review, and I agree with all of Jackie's accolades to all the people involved. Since she did such a good job going through everybody, I'll just go straight on to the slides. With regard to the modeling results, the next slide there, conceptually, storage in commodity supply chains, if you look at food, water, gasoline, oil, and natural gas, there's on order of 10% or more of storage in those networks. And for example, the natural gas network is one of the largest interconnected transport networks in the North America on Earth. It's a very complex network. It's got thousands and thousands of miles of network. Yet we've never seen 65 million people out of natural gas or 100 million people without natural gas. On the electricity side, we have had blackouts where we have 60 million or so people out of electricity. So why? One of the reasons is the natural gas sector has embedded storage all through it, one through its pipelines and through storage. And when you have storages, when you have interruptions to the supply chain, then you can avoid having these wide-scale cascading blackouts. And so we haven't really seen that in the natural gas industry, but we have seen that in the electricity industry. With regard to integrating energy storage with networks, the way the world has started to initially look at energy storage was it was going to be a cost basis. Everything had to be least cost, which is fine. That's a great view of the world. But if we take what's happened, the evolution that's happened, when we said competitive, when we saw the introduction of competitive markets, the introduction of wind turbines, the introduction of solar power, the introduction of demand response and energy efficiency, and now we're seeing the introduction of energy storage. Each phase of those, I've had different roles along the way, and when competitive markets came in, oh, those are no good, they're not going to work, they're never going to provide value. Same thing with wind. There was all these issues that would happen, yet we see this vast wind portfolio globally. Same thing with solar. Solar cost reduction is never going to happen. We're seeing solar PPAs around the world. They're just really amazing. Likewise, we're seeing that with demand response, energy efficiency, and we're also seeing that trend with energy storage, with cost reductions that Jackie has discussed. Now, one of the things with storage is because it has generation, transmission, distribution, and demand-like characteristics, it can be used as a tool across the whole supply chain of electricity sector of being generation, transmission, distribution, and demand. But it's often right now looked at just at the edge of the grid or some sort of, it's just after the grid is designed, let's see if storage could be one of the solutions to help with the grid. It's not deep in the planning process, deep in the market rule process. It's not deep in many of the grids. It's not deep in the actual planning process, yet it provides the characteristics across the whole supply chain. One of the emphasis on the modeling was, okay, just as an intuitive example, is if you place 1 megawatt hour of storage at a demand center, then that means during the peak time of the grid, where the grid is designed for, it's designed for peak conditions. That means during peak time, that would unload the distribution system, the feeders, the lines. It would unload the transformers and the voltage regulators. It would unload the step-up transformers, the transmission system, unload the transmission system, unload the peaking power plant, and unload the fuel supply system to the peaking power plant, that by 1 megawatt hour. So that's why when you look at energy storage, and if it's highly distributed, then there's a bit of a riddle in a way, in the sense that highly distributed energy storage has generally more value than centralized energy storage, but centrally controlled, not necessarily centrally owned, but centrally controlled storage generally has more value than distributed, not centrally controlled storage. So it's a bit of a riddle, but it's what we're seeing. So that's why we're seeing, when you analyze it that way and you look at from a grid design point of view and highly distributed format, then you can start to see some values, because you have deferrals both on operational costs and capital costs. All right, on the next slide there. So what we did is we developed a simulation of New England, and we made very, very detailed models of generators, transmission lines down to the main drop-off points into distribution feeders. We had a number of nodes, renewables, generation, and then we had load growth, some uncertainties, fuel prices, system regional plan, renewable availability. We had a number of uncertainties in there. Then we made a benchmark, and we compared this model to actual conditions of realized prices and realized generation capacity and those kind of things. And then we did what's called a capacity optimization, where we ran a simulation with technology agnostic. So one of the things that we wanted to make sure in the modeling is that we didn't a priori choose the storage duration, choose the storage technology. Instead, we wanted to let the grid do that. And so what we did is we allowed the grid to pick from a bucket of long duration storage, medium duration storage, short duration storage, and short duration storage. And then what the optimizer does is it comes up with the location, the megawatts, the megawatt hours, and the timing of when to install it. And then we looked at day-ahead hourly dispatches and sub-hourly real-time market dispatches. And then I looked at the overall optimizations and the cost reductions, and then did evaluations across like T&D deferral use cases, the impact of peak demand, reserves, renewable integration, reliability, and emissions. So one of the things that we found in this is when the storage operates, it's kind of like a peaking power plant. Let's say it has a 10% capacity factor, and you put $1 billion into a peaking power plant, and you get a 10% capacity factor out of that peaking power plant. So we're used to in the power sector to think capacity factors. In this study, we looked at dollar utilization. So if you put $1 billion into storage, how utilized are those dollars of investments? And so we're seeing like 95% capacity factors in storage, because when it's not doing peak shifting, or peak shaving, it's doing energy shifting daily, where, say, a gas turbine peaker plant wouldn't be able to necessarily do energy shifting or do things at night that energy storage could do, such as ancillary services or other kind of benefits like that. So it's not only the capacity factors to look at of the equipment, it's also the utilization of the dollars that are used to invest in that equipment. For example, a distribution feeder or a transmission line that we say modern power system engineering says that the design is modern if it can handle peak conditions and withstand reliability constraints and that kind of thing. Now that's necessary, of course, but it might not be as long, no longer sufficient in the sense that with energy storage, it's possible to work with the networks and get better utilization out of those investments in the transmission and distribution systems and use them at night. Things like the Canadian interconnectors into New England, things like import constraints into Boston. Also better utilization of even gas pipeline networks, because if you can charge at night storage, then when you peak shave peaking plants that are gas fed, then you're peak shaving the gas use as well, potentially without having to start the peak shaving gas turbines. All right, can we get to the next slide? So here's an example of a storage peak reduction. This is a case that was run where the optimizer came up with 1,776 megawatts of storage, and we saw that the peak reduction was about 9.77% or so by 2020. And then we compared natural gas conventional combustion turbines, natural gas advanced combustion turbines, and the cost of installs without the regional multipliers. Obviously, placing them in cities, they would be likely more expensive than this versus placing them in, on the countryside. Then the storage is dispatched on peak days to get maximum peak shaving, and then we get reduction of the peak can reduce the need for the additional peaker resource and avoid capital costs. But the interesting thing is this would be like the peak day that the storage would shave, but then throughout the year, the storage can multitask and be used for different purposes because it always gets its marginal cost of charge, if you will, from the cheapest energy resources at night, or the nighttime, the lowest energy price, maybe not the cheapest resource, but the lowest price, and then it can charge during the day. Discharge during the day, whereas peaking power plants might be only capable for just the peaking periods to be an economic decision to start and stop them. Next slide here, can my keyboard work? Yeah. Then the other one is the time shift of renewables and peak reduction. As Massachusetts, the number of distributed solar, rooftop solar and distributed solar projects increase in Massachusetts, and the number that Jackie quoted, it's a fairly large amount of solar relatively, and but the solar often, if you will, peaks ahead of where the load peaks. So the other thing that storage can help out with is to shave the peak right after the solar kind of phases out and help with that integration, as well as solar gets integrated to distribution feeders. You can start to get reverse power on distribution feeders, where energy storage can help mitigate system upgrades required for having reverse power on feeders. That is where the solar is leaving the distribution system and trying to get onto the transmission system, the solar generated power. Next slide. The benefit categories, we went across a number of categories: the energy cost reduction, reduced peak, ancillary services cost reduction, wholesale market cost reduction, T&D cost reduction, and increased renewable integration. So the energy storage, on the energy cost reduction, we looked at energy storage replaces the use of inefficient generators at peak times, reduce peak prices, reduce overall average energy price. This also benefits the natural gas supply infrastructure, because if you're charging at night and you're peak shaving the peak, as what I've said earlier, then there's some benefits there. Reduced peak, the energy storage can provide the peaking capacity, defer the capital costs of peaker plants, reduce costs in the capacity market. We are seeing with the energy efficiency, the overall energy reducing, but we are still seeing a growth in peak in Massachusetts in the demand forecast. So energy storage can help with that peak. Ancillary services cost reduction, energy storage would reduce the overall cost of ancillary services. So used for frequency regulation, spinning reserve, and voltage stabilization. Wholesale market cost reduction, the less wear and tear, to help with generator costs, less startup and shutdown costs, and reduced greenhouse gas emissions. Then with better utilization of the transmission distribution networks, we see reduction in losses, and maintenance of the system provides reactive power support, increases resilience, and defers investment. One of the areas that, is like the value of lost load of when there are these disturbances, such as like a Hurricane Irene, a Hurricane Alfred, or any of these ones that have had, substantial outages across the system. Whereas if you have a more distributed system, distributed energy resources, you'd be better able to respond to those events and still keep the beautiful fall foliage and foliage in Massachusetts that we all like. T&D cost reduction, we talked about that, and then increased renewable integration, addressing the reverse power flow and avoiding feeder upgrades, and then helping with fuel diversity of New England and Massachusetts as the dependence increases on natural gas to diversify. So it helps with the diversification process to have other resources to depend on during times of system stresses. I think that's the last slide there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Jackie,
you.
did you have any other comments, or should we move on?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll move on to the next step of the report. So thanks to Randall, now we have an understanding of the integration of energy storage and how it can provide system benefits. And so while this analysis of the system benefits alone would justify an investment in storage, in reality, the revenue mechanisms that currently exist don't recognize this value that energy storage can provide, and in most cases they're not sufficient to justify the investment. So the next step for the study team was to take the macro level information provided by Randall's analysis and then translate that into actual business cases that apply to the Commonwealth. And this was done to find out which ones are cost effective and to identify what additional incentives might be needed to make up the difference for the value that can't be currently obtained in today's market design. So from there, we can then inform specific policy and program recommendations to grow the use of storage in Massachusetts, where it's cost effective and beneficial. So we analyzed the economics of 10 specific storage use cases to evaluate how storage economics vary by business model, market involvement, and location. And the use cases include merchant wholesale applications, storage paired with renewable generation projects as a utility asset, and behind-the-meter applications at both commercial and residential locations. The use cases illustrate how energy storage owners and developers can capture value from owning, operating, or contracting for services from energy storage resources, as well as the system benefits that are created in that use case application, the system benefits that Randall described. So this table shows that when the potential revenue streams available to the project owner and the benefits that would accrue to the overall electric system are combined, that our analysis results in a benefit to cost ratio greater than 1 in almost every use case. So while all the all-in benefits outweigh the cost of investment, in many of the use cases, the value that the storage owner and developer can monetize through existing market mechanisms and regulatory constructs is too small for the investment to be made, even though doing so would result in net benefits to the electric ratepayers. So by examining these combined benefits from both the value that the storage resource would earn through market mechanisms, as well as the benefits that the storage resource would provide the system through through reductions in system costs, that's how we can determine whether energy storage is cost effective. So next I'll go through how we did a couple of these use cases and conducted the use case analysis. I can't go through all of them, obviously, because that would take too long. So I just picked a couple here. So the IOU use case describes an energy storage asset located at an IOU distribution substation that's experiencing incremental load growth and increased penetration of customers with distributed energy resources. So the storage resource can help defer the investment to upgrade the capacity of the distribution system by using the storage to manage the load, and the distributed resources reverse power flow at the substation. So you'll see here that the cost-benefit analysis shows that all potential benefits from the storage resource, including demand optimization, outage mitigation, distributed resource integration, outweigh the cost. But if you look on this page, you can see there's a gap. And if a project really only accounts for the traditional distribution upgrade, deferral, and voltage support benefits, then these benefits alone don't outweigh the cost. So as storage capital costs decrease, and distributed resources, the volume of them continue to grow, particularly solar PV, the utility can capture additional storage benefits such as managing the intermittent fluctuating output of distributed solar and avoiding reverse power flows at the substation. And then if there's multiple storage installations across the distribution system, then they could be coordinated and dispatched in a way as an aggregated demand management tool to provide peak shaving on peak days, and then the benefit of the storage can far outweigh the cost of storage at today's capital cost. So utilities can cost-effectively utilize energy storage to optimize peak demand reduction, reduce the effects of outages, and integrate solar PV. So next I show another use case example. I picked the energy storage with the gas generator. And in this use case, the energy storage asset is co-located or coordinated by the system operator or utility with a gas generator to improve the generator's operational efficiency. So oftentimes the gas generator doesn't operate at its optimal heat rate where it would realize the most efficient fuel consumption. And if an energy storage asset is dispatched, instead of using a generator to load follow and provide frequency response and regulation, a generator could operate at a constant output, reducing the number of starts and stops and the associated maintenance costs and GHG emissions. A more optimal use of gas is especially important to the Northeast, to the Commonwealth, during winter gas shortages. So utilizing energy storage to optimize fuel use can also lead to a decrease in the amount of burned oil during the winter months. The current revenue streams in this use case are not sufficient to justify a merchant investment in an energy storage asset, yet the project becomes cost-effective when considering the system benefits. So mechanisms are therefore needed to realize the system benefits. So I'll move on next. That's a couple examples of the use cases and how we showed the gap and why additional incentives need to be added to unlock the use of storage in the Commonwealth. And here I list some of the recommendations in the report, and we'll put this up again when Will Lauwer from DOER speaks, but you can see that some of the recommendations include launching project demonstrations for use case business models to jumpstart the market through the Energy Storage Initiative RFPs, rebate programs for customer-sited storage where behind-the-meter storage can reduce the cost of electricity and create system benefits through reduced peak demand. And that could be potentially funded through the ACP. Launching commercial and industrial solar and storage feasibility grant programs, community resiliency grants, green communities designations and grants where the storage could be enabled as a technology in the grant applications. Anyway, I'll leave this slide up because I think this is probably more oriented towards DOER and how they could actually implement some of these things. But I did want to also add that our recommendations also entailed a review of what the market rules are currently at ISO New England. And we highlighted some of what we thought were the challenges in the market design at ISO New England. Based on what we've seen done in other markets and what's being considered in an upcoming FERC proceeding that will be reviewed at a technical conference in Washington, D.C. in November. And so we made a recommendation to create an ISO New England Advanced Energy Storage Working Group to support a level playing field for the inclusion of advanced energy storage resources in ISO New England markets. And some of the things that we highlighted were that rules for energy storage need to recognize the flexible operating characteristics of the resource, that they need to be considered in co-optimization, dispatch bidding, settlements to allow energy storage resources to operate seamlessly from their negative to positive range, and so that they can fully participate in the energy and ancillary services and capacity markets consistent with conventional generation. We also listed some other areas that should be considered: interconnection, the generation interconnection process to incorporate energy storage specific needs in the study process, transmission planning. We also listed rules for behind the meter participation to consider baseline submetering, multiple use applications, retail versus wholesale rate treatment, just all these issues, how they would be addressed. And then finally, we discussed the issue of load reconstitution and suggest that more definition around that term needs to happen. So again, it's a pleasure and an honor to be on this webinar. I'll conclude my presentation with that and just show what the next steps and the timing are as listed in our stakeholder presentation that we gave with DOER and Mass CEC back in September, or October, I'm sorry. We're in October, you know what I mean, a few weeks ago. And I guess it was September. It was September 27th. And then you can see what some of the next steps are. And I'm sure at this point, Will might want to talk about some of what's happening next and Kavita. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Okay, thanks very much, Jackie and Randall. I think we're ready to have Will Lauwers from DOER discuss policy and programs going forward, which will attempt to make real the study's recommendations. So, Will, are you on the line?
I'm here, yes, Todd. And if it's okay with you, I'll try to be fairly brief to allow as much time as possible for questions at the end.
Great.
So thank you, Jackie, Randall, and Kavita. It's a pleasure to be here as well. I'm just going to try to briefly reiterate. They've done a great job covering it. But the key finding being that energy storage is cost-effective to Massachusetts constituents at current costs. But with current market barriers, it's not financially developable at the moment. So based on that, there is good reason for policy to properly value energy storage in the market today. So based on that, the study has a few key findings for potential policy recommendations, which may help to better properly value storage in the market. And so for next steps, we are proceeding with a few parallel stakeholder processes. There's the next solar incentive, the follow-up to the SREC 2 program. There's a straw proposal out on that at the moment, and that straw proposal currently includes energy storage adders, as was recommended as part of the study. We also have the energy storage demonstration RFP, which is coming out in the near future through the Mass CEC. And we have we are also investigating a number of other policies as required by the recent Comprehensive Energy Diversification Bill, which includes authorizing the DOER to determine whether to set energy storage targets. And with that, I think I'm at a point where I can hand it back over to you, Todd, and open up to questions.
Okay, great. So Thanks everybody for the presentations. We do have a large number of questions, and as I said, we're going till 4:30, so we'll get to as many of these as we can. First question is, and this is for, I would guess for Kavita, when is the RFP anticipated to be issued? This is referring to the upcoming energy storage demonstration project solicitation, and connected with that are the use cases for storage to be identified in the RFP, or is it the vendor's responsibility to identify use cases?
Thank you, Todd. So on the question of the timing of the RFP, I believe it should come out in the coming weeks. So it's pretty shortly. We're putting some final touches on it, so it should be soon. But I couldn't tell you exactly the date. But please stay tuned, everyone. And then as for the use cases, I believe, we're going to use the study as the context. So we imagine that there will be at least some use cases from the study that are relevant and pertinent, and if so, we encourage the applicants to call it out. But we're aware, that there are other use cases, the use cases in the study that were called out were only sort of samples and try to cover the diversity of the use cases, but we understand that, there are variations or other use cases that have not been covered, and so there are no points taken off for that. Just identify, we would expect the applicant to identify, what the use cases with the lowercase, so, what are where's the project being applied, what function it serves, what revenue streams there are, and what are some other benefits that it provides. Will, do you want to add to that?
No, I think that was good, and ready to move on to the next question.
Okay, great. Somebody wants to know whether there's any way to get access to the raw data used to form the basis of the report. I guess that would go to Jackie or Randall.
So I can take that one. With regard to the raw data, the report is highly referenced. So in each case, for example, we use the ISO New England load forecast, the SELT report. We used the generation data from the ISO New England. We used data from the AEO, the Annual Energy Outlook from the EIA as raw data. The report has most of the data in the report, a number of the data references in the report, and the data, some of the data points as well. There's the Energy Storage Handbook. There's a number of references throughout the data, and that's where the source of the data is at. We use no, if you will, consultant team assumptions in the report, so it's all assumptions that are publicly available.
Okay, thank you. Another question on the study. The questioner says the study lists $800 million in benefits to ratepayers. Over what time frame? What is the price of installing this storage, and who's paying?
Okay, we can split that one up. With regard to the who's paying, I think that's a question to be later determined. But with regard to the storage and the installation and over the time. So the study started with 2016, had a constraint of less than, say, 5 megawatts of storage in 2016. Then it allowed storage to build. Didn't say how much needed to build. The optimizer picked how much built. And then we assumed a 10-year lifetime for the storage project. So, and then we stopped the building at about 2020 or so, the building of storage. And then the storage that built in 2020 would go on for 10 years of operation. And then we had the cost, the learning rates, and the costs associated with the storage and the projections according to publicly available sources on the cost reductions also in the model. So there was a tendency to build the storage throughout the years and take advantage of the cost declines, as well as building storage up right away up front. And with regard to who pays for the storage, that depends on the market and the market barriers and all that. That's to be determined, because in some ways you could rate base the storage for, say, utility applications, but if that same storage could provide wholesale market benefits as well as benefits to the transmission and distribution utilities, then maybe there'd be wholesale market income as well as rate base income to the storage developer. But those kind of rules and policies haven't really been worked out yet.
Okay, thank you. Somebody wants to know whether the $2.2 billion estimated as savings is over the years till 2030. I think just looking at this question, I think we need to make a distinction between the modeling exercise that identified a larger amount of capacity of storage that would be beneficial or optimal on the Massachusetts electric grid, which is in the gigawatt range, versus the specific recommendations for policy and program development, which would be designed to support a smaller amount of storage actually being deployed. So if somebody would want to speak to that and then maybe answer this question about the $2.2 billion in estimated savings and what's the time frame for that.
Okay, I can take that one. For the $2.2 billion, that was a total of 15 years of value, and so that would be starting from 2016 running out to 2030 of the large larger build-out plan, not plan, but scenario, if you will, a simulation, and it was associated with that over the 15-year period.
Okay. Somebody wants to know in the use cases, what do you mean by merchant? And then they say they'd like to know the benefits for a standard commercial user of the grid, like a business, municipal building, etc. So what's meant by merchant in the use cases? Is that a merchant provider of storage?
Yeah, so this is Jackie. We have a description of each 10 of the use cases, and yeah, the merchant would be, owned by a third party, like a merchant resource that develops and buys and sells and earns the revenues on its own, as opposed to, say, a utility or a municipal ownership. So that was the intention of merchant, one that would make its revenues based on existing market revenues.
Okay. This question is directed to Jackie. The questioner says the slides show a BCA for a 1 megawatt/1 megawatt hour energy storage system. Was a sensitivity analysis completed to determine the optimal power to energy ratio for each use case?
Yes. So our it's in, I need to pull up the chapter, but yes, the sensitivity analysis was done. Randall might be able to speak to it directly while I'm finding it, but the description of that was included in the report.
Sure, I could say a few words there. So one of the things that we've seen with energy storage applications around the world is sometimes people pick the technology or they pick the duration of the technology, and then they focus the storage in on one aspect, such as reliability, fixing reliability or helping with reliability. So just pick a 4-hour duration and then specify that as a program. So we've seen an example like that around the world, whereas this study said don't a priori pick the technology or pick the megawatts or pick the duration. Let the optimizer do that. And so the optimizer actually, through different runs and different scenarios, we were able to get at the overall the optimal ratio of megawatts and megawatt hours, because there's been a long time debate in storage, should it be megawatts, should it be megawatt hours? It turns out basic characteristics of power grids require both and combinations of both. And in some situations, megawatt hours are worth more or more valuable to an application, and in some situations, megawatts are worth more to an application, and in some situations, a combination of megawatts and megawatt hours are valuable. So the overall study did optimize the ratios of megawatts and megawatt hours, and did not a priori, that is ahead of the study, predetermine and put those as inputs to the study. It was determined through the results of the optimizations.
Okay, thank you. Somebody wants to know, were you able to quantify the impact of outages and resilience or reliability that storage could provide? If so, what model did you use?
So that was one of the use cases where we did not go through an elaborate quantification. And in the study, it's described more as a, more qualitatively. Certainly, it incorporates aspects of the other use cases that are described. So as a general answer, I would say no, we did not. But there certainly is a lot of information from the use cases that is applicable. And then we pulled from, the costs of outages. We have a table that shows what the impact is, how expensive these different outages are. So that information is provided in the study.
Okay. Here's a question that I think is relevant to the recent legislation that was signed into law in Massachusetts that directs DOER to determine by the end of the year whether to institute a utility energy storage procurement target that would then be become a mandate for utilities. The question is, if DOER is to set a target, would DPU be obligated to enforce it with the IOUs, being that being the investor-owned utilities? Maybe somebody from DOE, I guess it would be Will from DOER, could speak to that generally, and maybe just kind of bring everyone up to date on what's going on with that, and then how that would be enforced if it happened.
Sure. So from a general sense, that is still something that is under discussion. I think a lot of people are coming to the table with that idea of it would need to be through DPU because they are referencing the way California has implemented their energy storage targets. So I don't think that's a requirement or necessary by any means as a potential enforcement mechanism, but it is the process of determining whether to set a target is really where the current stakeholder process is, which is due by the end of this year, December 31st, whether to set a target. And then we would have until July 1st to adopt the target. And I think enforcement mechanisms and incentive type mechanisms would be something that would fall more under, if the determination was yes, then how it's structured.
Okay, great. Here's somebody who says, you've mentioned the CO2 emissions reductions in several instances. Did you look at emission reductions from other pollutants, such as nitrogen oxides, which would also be reduced if emissions from fossil fuel plants could be reduced or avoided?
Yes, we did. What we did is we looked at CO2, SO2, NOx, and PM10 particles emissions and potential reductions of those emissions with the introduction of energy storage.
Okay. Did you come to any conclusions about that?
Yes, we did. There's, I think they're posted in the report. Some of the numbers. Generally, if the system is optimized with storage, then you do generally see a reduction in these emissions over time. Now, the observation, though, is that would mean that it would need to be part of the dispatch engine, the overall dispatch engine of dispatching the overall grid. And this is what I had spoke about in the riddle, is that highly distributed storage generally has more value than centralized storage. But to get the real value out of that highly distributed storage is to essentially control that storage and dispatch it, essentially dispatch that storage to get these benefits.
Well, thank you. That brings up an interesting point. We're located, CISA is located in Vermont, and there are some projects that we've been involved with here with local utility that are in fact putting battery storage behind customer meters, so it's distributed behind the meter storage, and enabling in such a way that it enables the utility to aggregate and dispatch that distributed storage from behind the customer meter when it is advantageous to do so in order to reduce costs and provide grid benefits. And then, of course, the customer gets the benefits of having storage, such as resiliency, for example, behind their meter. And that seems like a sort of best of both worlds. Is that something that Massachusetts is looking to promote or support in any of the programs that are going to be rolled out following on this study?
Hi, this is Will. Sorry for the quiet period there. I think at the moment we are looking for a variety of use cases for demonstration and to get some early lessons learned. So there's definitely interest there, but again, that's just one of a number of use cases that are appearing to have a positive return on investment. And it's worth noting that the behind-the-meter use case is actually, I believe, one of the only, that and the resiliency cases that did not have a positive ROI immediately, but then if investigated where it were aggregated and somehow essentially dispatched, then it did have that positive ROI as the other use cases showed.
Okay, thanks. Well, this is a related question from a participant who wants to know: are we going to see any incentives or rebates for homeowners on energy storage as there are on PV? So, I mean, any of the programs like the solar, next generation solar program, or any of the other rebates available for homeowners?
Right. So that is something that is to be determined. One of the recommendations in the study was to do a rebate type structured program. Again, that's the current state of that is it was a recommendation in the study, so it's not something that has been formalized. And then in the next solar incentive program, that program, there's been a straw proposal that's been released that's publicly available, and it's currently, they have a number of specific working groups going through fleshing out the details. So I think in the coming few months, that'll become much more clear as to how that structure is set up and what those incentives look like.
Great, thanks. Well, here's a question that goes more toward the industry, development of the industry in Massachusetts. What sort of workforce needs will the sector have in the next few years, and what roles will be in highest demand? And I guess we could probably add to that, what sort of provision is the state making to make sure that those workforce needs can be met?
I think that's one for Kavita.
Okay, I was just checking to see if Jackie would have an answer. So that's a good question, and that's something that our organization is focused on. So we would, we are interested in examining that, and a lot of what we are trying to do is see how our existing program can be amplified to target storage. We have an internship program and a jobs board, and a few capacity building programs that involve developing training materials and so on. On the other hand, those might, they may not be comprehensive and adequate, but Mass CEC is keenly interested in this topic and intends to look into it more closely.
Okay, great. Yeah,
there is a chapter in the study, too, that looks at some of the program mechanisms that are in place and, does include ideas and recommendations in that regard as well. Hey, and Todd, I wanted to go back. That other question that had that was about the ratepayer benefits. I did want to clarify that the study does say in the system analysis modeling study sections for the 1766 megawatts that entails $3.4 billion of savings, and 2.3 of that is associated with ratepayers, and 1.1 are market revenues. So we did clarify that for our analysis. I did want to. I mean, that's different than what's highlighted with the with the recommendations in the beginning. But in the section about the analysis, there is a split between market revenues and ratepayer benefits. We were very clear to do that.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I wish we had more time because we do have more questions, but it's come to the end of our hour and a half, and I don't want to push it further since it's already quite a long webinar. But I want to thank all our presenters and participants. There's the study, State of Charge study, is quite large and detailed, and there's a lot there. So if you haven't seen it, I really urge you to go and download it from the Mass CEC or DOER website and take a look. It's quite a study. It's very comprehensive in terms of its analysis and also the suite of recommendations for policy and program development. And so it's really, we're viewing it as a sort of a flagship study for the other states to look to, and we're starting to see some interest from other states in doing that. Samantha, do we have any upcoming webinars that we want to announce before we close this out?
We do. We have a webinar next week on energy storage for public health, and you can find more information on that on our website at csid.org/webinars. The webinar is on Wednesday, November 2nd in the afternoon.
Great, and maybe we could get the URL up on the screen and contact. There we go. Thank you. So again, thanks everybody for coming. Thank you to particularly to Massachusetts DOER and Mass CEC, to the all the participants, and Sandia National Laboratories and US DOE, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. And yes, this will be archived on our website if you'd like to view it later or send a link to a colleague. Thanks very much. We'll see you next time.